Shelley Duvall has been compared to many things: a Modigliani painting, an extraterrestrial, and a kind of time-traveling neo-flapper. The truth is that she was unique and irreplaceable. She had incredible charisma and gave cinema one of the most harrowing performances of all time, as Wendy in The Shining. However, one day while working on a Steven Soderbergh film in the Texan desert, something struck her. She decided to slip away from Hollywood and disappear. For 20 years, the media hunted her down to no avail. Finally, the truth was revealed in the most awful way possible. Following her recent passing, we are looking at the life of 1970s icon Shelley Duvall and putting to rest some of the dreadful rumors that came from Dr. Phil's exploitation of her. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Apart from her 2 decades in Hollywood, Shelley Duvall lived most of her life within a 200-mile radius in Texas. She was born in Fort Worth on July 7, 1949, to Bob and Bobby Duvall. After having 3 more children, all boys, the family eventually settled in Houston. Her father was a cattle auctioneer who later became a criminal lawyer. Her mother succeeded in real estate, founding her own company, Space City Realty, in Houston. As a child, Duvall was artistic and energetic, earning the nickname Manic Mouse from her mother. "I was a little terror sometimes," she recalled. "I used to run around a lot, tipping things over." In high school, Duvall was a straight-A student who dreamed of becoming a scientist. However, in 11th grade, her grades began to drop as she became interested in boys and developed a unique style, including white go-go boots, a page boy haircut, and large false eyelashes. She started dating a long-haired greaser and riding around in his Ford Mustang. Her aspirations in science ended once and for all after she dropped out of South Texas Junior College in Houston. This happened after she witnessed a monkey vivisection, which left her horrified. "So I went to work at Foley's department store. Ladies would come up to the counter and I'd tie scarves for them and show them how to look pretty. I'd come home smelling like a lily," she said, "and I did some modeling, not much." However, it was enough to meet her first and only husband, another long-haired man, this time an artist named Bernard Sampson. "We met at a benefit for the astronauts that crashed," Duvall recalled, referring to the 1967 Apollo 1 disaster. "I was modeling a Rudi Gernreich bathing suit, the kind with the cutouts." To support Sampson's art career, Duvall began thinking of ways she could make money. Before any master plan could be formulated, she made a connection that would change her life. They were living at Sampson's parents' house at the time, and Duvall hosted a party there. She aimed to sell some of his artwork to earn enough money for them to move out. Among the guests were 3 crew members from Brewster McCloud, Altman's follow-up to his 1970 hit comedy, MASH. They were charmed by Duvall's appearance and entertained by her energetic sales pitch. They decided to humor her by suggesting she take the paintings to a couple of art patrons, which was actually a secret audition for Altman and his producer, Lou Adler. Duvall arrived for the meeting wearing an embroidered Mexican blouse, patched blue jeans with bells tied to her waist, and a stack of paintings under her arm. She had the most amazing amount of energy I'd ever seen in anyone. She looked like a flower, Adler later recalled. Initially, Duvall thought she had walked into a porn shoot. However, after being assured of Altman's credentials, she agreed to a Polaroid test. The test took place at the Rose Garden near the Houston Zoo. Altman was astonished by her looks, and he would merely be the first of many fascinated by her appearance. At times, this fascination seems to tip into something almost fetishistic. Even in her obituary, The Guardian could not restrain itself from describing her in unflattering terms, writing that she was, quote, "toothpick thin with bingo ball eyes, a Modigliani face, and a tremulous, broken doll voice." Duvall was called the Queen of Awkward Beauty, but these backhanded compliments or outright insults seemed to miss the point. Whenever she walked into a room, her incredible magnetism, height, and refined features caused people to take notice of her. In truth, there is no such thing as unconventional beauty. Either you turn heads or you don't, and Shelley turned everyone's head. It just so happens that Altman was the first to truly recognize the huge potential of transferring this beauty and charisma to the screen. During the test, Altman thought Duvall's naivety was an act. I decided to shoot a test, so I took her out in the park and put a camera on her and just asked her questions, he explained in his book, Altman on Altman. I was really quite mean to her, as I thought she was an actress. But she wasn't kidding. That was her. I was leaning on the statue of a male angel, Duvall recalled later. It's still there, the bronze statue in the rose garden, and I got the part. This marked the beginning of a successful collaboration with Altman. They made 7 films together, with the number 7 playing a curiously important role in her life. Their last and most successful film, 3 Women, was released in 1977. Duvall herself was born on the 7th day of the 7th month in 1949. The first film they worked on was Brewster McCloud. The film Altman had already begun making when he met Duvall. It follows a young recluse played by Bud Cort, who lives in a fallout shelter under the Houston Astrodome. In this strange bird-themed fantasy, Duvall portrayed Suzanne, a bird-like tour guide at the Astrodome. Variety described the film as a sardonic fairy tale for the times. Lou Adler's made-in-Houston production demands an intellectual audience which is satisfied with smiles instead of belly laughs. However, contemporary reviews were mostly mediocre. Stanley Kaufman of The New Republic wrote, "A fairly promising comedy fantasy is bumbled because the script idea lacks theme and clarity and point, and the cast the ability to battle poor material." Over time, the film's reputation has improved, and it is much more appreciated today. In 1971, she had another supporting role in Altman's McCabe and Mrs. Miller. Duvall played Ida, a woman who comes to town to be Bart Coyle's mail-order bride. Once again, her striking presence caught the eye, most of all the knowing look she gives to Mrs. Miller at Bart's funeral. Altman called the film an anti-Western because it defied many traditional Western tropes. Filmed in British Columbia during the fall and winter of 1970, the movie premiered on June 24, 1971. Over the years, it has won major critical acclaim, and at the time it earned Julie Christie an Oscar nomination for Best Actress. By 1974's Thieves Like Us, Duvall had been given star billing by Altman. She played Kichi, the daughter of a garage owner in Depression-era Mississippi, who falls in love with an escaped convict, played by Keith Carradine. The film was based on Edward Anderson's novel of the same name, which also inspired the 1948 film They Live by Night, directed by Nicholas Ray, a fact unbeknown to Altman. In any case, Altman's version remained truer to the book. Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave Thieves Like Us 3.5 stars out of 4. He noted that while the film might have, quote, all sorts of weaknesses in character and plot, it executed a visual strategy so well that it gave an uncanny feel for this time and this place. Pauline Kael of The New Yorker praised it further, calling it the closest to flawless of Altman's films, a masterpiece. She also lauded Duvall, writing, "She melts in difference. You're unable to repress your response. You go right to her in delight, saying I'm yours. She seems able to be herself on the screen in a way that nobody has ever been before. Her charm appears to be totally without affectation." Thieves Like Us prove that Duvall was more than just a standout face on screen. During this film, Altman pulled her aside and told her she was a great actress. And yet she had not had to sacrifice her unusual affectations, such as her strong Texan accent and her way of enunciating certain words, especially the way she says yes when Bowie asks Kichi if she likes him. Altman's words gave Duvall the confidence to consider working with other directors, and her career began to grow quickly. However, she made 3 more films with Altman before branching out. Around this time, she gained her first real taste of fame and was dubbed the Texan Twiggy, referring to the famous slender British model from the late 1960s. Lou Adler had me fly to LA, Duvall recalled. I did an interview with the LA Times. Charles Champlin, he was the head of the Sunday entertainment section, wrote an incredible story. The picture took up half the page and the headline was, "Don't Ever Change." In 1974, Duvall and her husband Samson, who had been married since 1970, decided to move to LA for her career. They settled into a small cabin over a one-car garage near Griffith Park Observatory. However, their marriage ended that same year. The film industry was undergoing a major transformation, embracing a more auteur-driven, anti-formulaic approach, known as New Hollywood. Duvall found herself at the heart of this creative surge as the unique muse to one of its leading directors. She made friends with Carol Kane, who suggested they visit an actor friend's house. "She took me over there and I met Jack Nicholson and Roman Polanski," Duvall said. Warren Beatty was also there, but she had already met him on the set of McCabe and Mrs. Miller. "It wasn't a party. They were just waiting for the basketball game to start," she explained. 5 years later, Duvall and Nicholson would star together in a film that would become a defining moment for both of them. Her first impression of Nicholson was that he was, quote, "funny and charming, and smart and interesting to talk to, like all the men in that circle of friends." Duvall described those early days in LA as fun but quiet, as she waited for calls from other directors that didn't seem to come. "I did begin to meet interesting people," she said. "There was a whole group of starving actors that had parties. Each person would bring a dish of food." There were also more glamorous events at the homes of big names like Superman director Richard Donner. These gatherings, Duvall remembered, were just to look at the young actresses and actors. Some became famous. Like, there was this carpenter guy who got a big job building a waterfall for the home of a studio executive. Every time the executive would have a party, everybody saw the waterfall. That carpenter? None other than Harrison Ford. Her next role came in 1975 when Altman cast her in his new project, Nashville. The movie explores the lives of various people involved in the country and gospel music scene in Nashville, Tennessee, over 5 days leading up to a concert for a presidential candidate from the Replacement Party. Duvall played Martha, the niece of Mr. Green. Martha, who has renamed herself L.A. Joan, comes to Nashville supposedly to visit her dying Aunt Esther, but spends her time chasing different male musicians. Nashville is known for its broad scope, featuring 24 main characters, an hour of musical performances, and multiple storylines. Paramount Pictures released Nashville in the summer of 1975, and it received widespread acclaim. Critics loved the ensemble cast, particularly Blakely and Tomlin, as well as the film's mise-en-scène and soundtrack. It earned plenty accolades, including 5 Academy Award nominations: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actress for both Ronnie Blakely and Lily Tomlin, and won Best Original Song for Cara Dean's I'm Easy. Nashville has since been considered Altman's masterpiece and one of the greatest films ever made. However, at the time of its release, the mainstream country music community largely despised the film. Many artists felt it mocked their talent and sincerity. Altman believed they were upset because he chose not to use their music, opting instead for the actors to compose their own songs. He later noted that the movie had become more popular in Nashville among newer generations. The film had further media attention in 1980 due to its climactic scene where Barbara Jean is shot, which eerily mirrored the murder of John Lennon. In an interview on the 2000 DVD release, Altman mentioned that reporters at the time frequently asked him about Nashville and its unsettling foreshadowing of a music star's assassination. Duvall had another supporting role in the next Altman film, Buffalo Bill and the Indians, or Sitting Bull's History Lesson, where she played Grover Cleveland's wife. However, this revisionist Western was not as well received as McCabe and Mrs. Miller. It was released in 1976 and therefore the bicentennial celebration of the United States, and Americans were not in the mood for a film that tried to skewer the notion of the heroic myth that noble Europeans overcame so-called bloodthirsty savages to establish the country in this celebration year. It did fare better in Europe, where it picked up the Golden Bear at that year's Berlin Film Festival. In 1976, Duvall headed to New York City for a small but notable role in Woody Allen's Annie Hall. She portrayed a superficial Rolling Stone reporter who repeatedly calls the Maharishi transplendent and describes sex with Allen's character as a Kafkaesque experience. Though her screen time was brief, she contributed to a film that is widely regarded as one of the greatest ever made. During the making of Annie Hall, Duvall met and began dating Paul Simon, who played a record producer in the film. The couple was often seen dancing at Manhattan's famous Studio 54, with Duvall in her Laura Ashley-inspired outfits, towering over Simon. They became one of the unique power couples of the 1970s, alongside pairs like Angelica Houston and Jack Nicholson, or Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland. Before Simon, Duvall had dated other musicians, including Ringo Starr, with whom she shared a birthday. Starr was also born on the 7th day of the 7th month, although he was 9 years older. However, her relationship with Simon seemed more serious and committed, or so it appeared. Duvall and Simon spent some time apart when she worked on Altman's film Three Women, his masterfully surreal and avant-garde project. Altman claimed the idea came to him in a dream, fully formed, including the cast. This film became a major breakthrough for Duvall. Filmed over 6 weeks in Palm Springs, Three Women tells the story of Millie Lamoureux, played by Duvall, a clueless and self-absorbed health spa worker who invites a co-worker named Pinky, played by Sissy Spacek fresh from her role in Carrie, to be her roommate. The film explores their strange, codependent relationship. The third woman in the title is Janice Rule's character, Willie Hart, an artist at Millie's apartment complex, the Purple Sage. Willie paints a mysterious mural on the swimming pool which metaphorically permeates the film with a unique atmosphere. We never knew where it was heading, Spacek recalled in a later interview. Every morning we would get pages for what we were shooting that day, and we always shot in sequence, which was just a wonderful thing. Spacek described Duvall as an extraordinary co-star. She was funny, kind, everyone adored her. She was always prepared, always in good humor, and took her work really seriously. Duvall's dedication paid off as her performance seriously impressed critics. Roger Ebert noted, "There is an openness about her, as if somehow nothing has come between her open face and our eyes. No camera, dialogue, makeup, method of acting, and she is spontaneously being the character." Duvall won the Best Actress award at the 1977 Cannes Film Festival. "I was with her," Spacek recalled. "It was amazing. She blew it out of the water." Millie, Duvall's character, is unique in her obsessive pursuit of conventionality, paradoxically making her seem slightly offbeat. She is awkward, overly concerned with women's magazines, and obsessed with being socially perfect to an unhealthy degree. She remains an unforgettable character. Millie's humor and sadness make her transformation towards the end of the film really fascinating and compelling. Just before the film spirals into its own mysterious concluding logic, the climax of Three Women features a graphic scene where Millie, helpless, has to deliver a stillborn baby while Pinky ignores her pleas for a doctor. This raw and disturbing scene was what convinced Kubrick to cast Duvall in his adaptation of Stephen King's novel, The Shining. Kubrick himself called Duvall with the offer. "He said I was great at crying," she remembered. Duvall had never met Kubrick before and didn't know what to expect from him. He didn't send a script but mailed her a copy of King's novel, instructing her to read it. At that time, Duvall was living with Simon in Manhattan. "I was at a really scary scene, and I didn't hear Paul come in," she said. "He snuck up behind and went, blah. I went, ah. I got really mad at him. I said, why did you do that?" Though Duvall and Simon had been living together for 2 years, they had been drifting apart. On New Year's Day 1979, just as Duvall was about to board a Concorde flight to London to start filming The Shining, Simon broke up with her at the airport. Unbeknownst to Duvall, Simon had been having an affair with her friend Carrie Fisher for some time, and chose this moment to end their relationship as she was conveniently leaving for an extended period. In truth, Duvall was also unhappy with Simon's controlling behavior and attempts to extinguish her inner child. She said, "I was hanging out with the most sophisticated, most glamorous people, but I felt lost, bored, depressed, like Alice in Wonderland. Although it wasn't such a wonderful, wonderful Wonderland, as Alice found out." Duvall cried throughout the flight across the Atlantic. This was something of a prelude to the emotional extremes she would soon face. Upon arriving in London, Kubrick greeted her with his daughter Vivian. "We had a nice dinner and that was it," Duvall recalled. "The rest of the time we were at work." While Three Women took 6 weeks to film, The Shining required 56 weeks. This was partly due to a fire in February 1979 at EMI Elstree Studios, which damaged the Overlook Hotel set, which was the largest set ever constructed there at the time. However, the primary reason was Kubrick's notoriously meticulous approach. The schedule was intense, with Kubrick filming 6 days a week for up to 16 hours a day. During much of this time, Duvall had to push herself to the brink of hysteria to portray the wife of a writer, played by Jack Nicholson, who goes mad in a snowbound hotel and attempts to murder his family with an axe. Unlike Nicholson, who rented a home in London with his girlfriend Angelica Houston, Duvall rented a flat near the studio in Hertfordshire. She lived there throughout the shoot with only a dog and 2 birds for company. Houston later commented, "Nobody does that. You go back and forth from London, even though you could get stuck in 2-hour traffic going in and out. But Shelley did that for a good year and a half. She got herself an apartment and lived there because she was just terribly dedicated and didn't want to shortchange herself or anyone else by not giving over fully to her commitment." Duvall explained the demanding nature of the shoot, saying, "Kubrick doesn't print anything until at least the 35th take. 35 takes running and crying and carrying a little boy. It gets hard, and full performance from the first rehearsal. That's difficult." Before filming a scene, Duvall would listen to sad songs on her Sony Walkman. She explained, "Or you just think about something very sad in your life, or how much you miss your family or friends. But after a while, your body rebels. It says, 'Stop doing this to me. I don't want to cry every day.' And sometimes just that thought alone would make me cry. To wake up on a Monday morning so early and realize that you just had to cry all day because it was scheduled. I would just start crying. I'd be like, oh no, I can't. And yet I did it. I don't know how I did it. Jack said that to me too. He said, 'I don't know how you do it.'" When asked if Kubrick had been unusually cruel or abusive to her to get the performance he wanted, Duvall replied, "He's got that streak in him. He definitely has that. But I think mostly because people have been that way to him at some time in the past. His first 2 films were Killer's Kiss and The Killing. He was very warm and friendly to me. He spent a lot of time with Jack and me. He just wanted to sit down and talk for hours while the crew waited. And the crew would say, 'Stanley, we have about 60 people waiting.' But it was very important work." Angelica Houston, however, remembers the situation differently. She felt the director and Nicholson could be too harsh on Duvall. "I got the feeling, certainly through what Jack was saying at the time, that Shelley was having a hard time just dealing with the emotional content of the piece," she said, "and they didn't seem to be all that sympathetic. It seemed to be a little bit like the boys were ganging up. That might have been completely my misread on the situation, but I just felt it. And when I saw her during those days, she seemed generally a bit tortured, shook up. I don't think anyone was being particularly careful of her." Kubrick allegedly instructed the cast and crew not to approach Duvall when she broke down and was suffering, telling her that it didn't help her performance when people sympathized with her. Nicholson claimed that Kubrick, quote, "picked on her more than anyone else." The outcome of this stress was that she began shedding hair, which she presented to Kubrick in clumps as evidence of how hard he was pushing her. Despite this, the final product of The Shining is undeniably extraordinary, with Duvall's performance being a powerful part of what makes the film so great. There is a scene in The Shining that holds the Guinness World Record for most retakes for one scene with dialogue. This scene features Scatman Crothers and Danny Lloyd, the young actor who played Danny Torrance, discussing the psychic ability to shine, which allows Danny to see the hotel's gruesome past. Kubrick had the actors do it 148 times. Another demanding scene, the famous staircase scene, was shot 127 times. It was a difficult scene, but it turned out to be one of the best scenes in the film, Duvall said. Not everyone appreciated the film, though. Stephen King, the author of the original novel, was particularly critical of Duvall's portrayal of Wendy Torrance. King stated she was basically just there to scream and be stupid, and that's not the character that I wrote about. While King envisioned Wendy as a strong, blonde beauty, Duvall brought a different kind of intensity to the role. Her portrayal made sense within the film's context. Her fear was meant to be palpable and relatable, not just another Hollywood blonde envisioned as prey. Duvall's performance might not have aligned with King's vision, but it isn't weak or stupid at all. On the contrary, her portrayal shows the fragility and complex psychology, something King seems to have missed. When she tells a psychiatrist it was just one of those things you do to a child 1,000 times, it's clear she's speaking more about her husband than herself. Her trembling, wide-eyed fear and forgotten cigarette ash give the audience a subtle but deep sense of dread. Her opening scene is a masterclass in naturalistic acting, especially when contrasted with Nicholson's more stylized performance. In the film, Duvall's Wendy is a survivor, She saves Danny's life multiple times, pushing him down a snowbank to escape Jack, wielding a knife in self-defense, finding him outside the hedge maze and driving them both to safety in the snowcat. She confronts both her husband's madness and the hotel's horrors, surviving both. In many respects, she is the story's heroine. Her performance is one of the standout naturalistic performances in horror cinema, particularly impressive in one of the genre's most stylized films. She serves as the warm light in the cold, chilling atmosphere of the movie, the character we root for throughout.
Here's Johnny!
In the 1980s, Duvall moved into a broader scope of roles, starting with her famous portrayal of Olive Oyl in Altman's Popeye. Even though it became a smash hit on VHS later on, in 1980 the film didn't quite capture the spirit of the new decade. Paramount and Disney had high expectations, but the movie fell short of becoming the blockbuster they hoped for, and they deemed it a disappointment. Once celebrated by critics, Altman now faced rejection in Hollywood, and instead retreated to Paris to direct low-budget film adaptations of stage plays. However, Roger Ebert praised Duvall in the movie, saying she was born to play Olive Oyl, and noted that with Popeye, Altman showed it is possible to take the broad strokes of a comic strip and turn them into sophisticated entertainment. Duvall appeared in 3 more films during the 1980s. Her next role was in Terry Gilliam's fantasy adventure, Time Bandits, alongside John Cleese and Sean Connery. Co-written with fellow Python Michael Palin and financed by George Harrison, the film was released on July 2, 1981 in the United Kingdom and November 6, 1981 in the United States. It opened at number 1 at the weekend box office in the US and Canada, eventually grossing $36 million on a $5 million budget. Originally, Palin was to play Robin Hood, but John Cleese was cast instead for his greater box office appeal. Palin and Duvall played the recurring roles of Vincent and Pansy. Cleese based his performance on the Duke of Kent, inspired by watching him have trivial and mindless conversations with footballers at the FA Cup final. Duvall then worked with Tim Burton on the 1984 film Frankenweenie. This film tells the story of a young boy who brings his dead dog back to life in a parody of Frankenstein, with Duvall playing Susan Frankenstein, the boy's mother. While Frankenweenie had its roots in horror, the only people who were truly horrified by it were Disney. After completing Frankenweenie, Burton was fired by Disney, which felt he had misused company resources and produced a film unsuitable for its wholesome young audience. Despite being shelved, Burton's later success with films like Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, Batman, and Edward Scissorhands led to Frankenweenie's home video release in 1992. Duvall found herself in favor with a whole new generation as the creator and host of Fairy Tale Theater, which aired from 1982 to 1987. This series reimagined classic stories, helping popularize cable television, and featured performers such as Joan Collins, Carrie Fisher, Mick Jagger, Liza Minnelli, Vanessa Redgrave, and Christopher Reeve. Directors included Tim Burton, Francis Ford Coppola, Roger Vadim, and Eric Idle. Duvall not only introduced each episode but also appeared in several roles, including Rapunzel, where she starred alongside Jeff Bridges and Gina Rowlands. These days, it's common for studios to reinterpret classic fairy tales like Snow White and Sleeping Beauty. They offer familiar stories with unique twists, and it's a tried and tested model. But Duvall was ahead of this trend with fairy tale theater. One episode, Rapunzel, begins with Jeff Bridges stealing radishes from a witch's garden for Duvall, who plays his pregnant, craving wife. The traditional story has the witch taking Rapunzel and raising her in a tower, but Duvall's version includes nightmares about cannibalistic radishes and Gina Rowlands' witch ranting about how men are not to be trusted. In the latter half of the episode, Duvall and Bridges also play Rapunzel and the Prince. When Rapunzel meets the prince for the first time, she asks him to explain what a man is since she's never met one. And in an example of the show's occasional adult humor, Bridges responds, "Let me come up there and I'll show you." Later, the witch tricks the prince and pushes him out the window. He hits his head, and with the help of some strange CGI effects, a disturbing orange-red blood starts trickling from his eyes, causing him to go blind. This scene is pure nightmare fuel for children, and probably wouldn't be acceptable today, but back in the 1980s, it was a phenomenon. Duvall didn't just put a simple twist on these stories. She was like a living ragdoll, and her charismatic, quirky presence was apparent in every episode. Fairy tale theater has the dark whimsy of Tim Burton, the playful nature of an antique German storybook, and the humor and famous faces of the 80s. It's almost as if David Lynch decided to start making children's stories. Fairy tale theater is a bizarre yet delightful mix, but if you were young in the 1980s or 90s and had access to cable TV, it was unforgettable. Fairy tale theater was merely the first in a series of children's projects that Duvall created, including albums, additional series, and the 1990 TV special, Mother Goose Rock and Rhyme. During the production of Mother Goose Rock and Rhyme, she met and fell in love with Dan Gilroy, a member of Madonna's early band Breakfast Club. Although Gilroy had been romantically linked to Madonna, he became Duvall's life partner after they met. In the 1990s, Duvall had a few roles of varying significance. She had a minor part in Suburban Commando, starring Hulk Hogan, but later appeared in more substantial roles, in Steven Soderbergh's thriller The Underneath, Jane Campion's adaptation of Henry James's The Portrait of a Lady, and Guy Maddin's avant-garde film Twilight of the Ice Nymphs. After these projects, Duvall did not take on any major roles and had no screen credits between the comedy Manna from Heaven in 2002 and the horror film The Forest Hills in 2023. During this 2-decade hiatus, articles questioning where is she now would periodically appear, but the answers would not be forthcoming. An air of real mystery began to surround her, and some were concerned. She seemed to suddenly drop Hollywood like a hot iron and retreat to another world, the one she came from. In the mid-90s, she left behind her 3-acre hillside property in Studio City, along with 36 birds, 8 dogs, and 2 cats, and moved to Blanco, near Austin, Texas. Some say the final straw was the Northridge earthquake on January 17, 1994, which caused huge damage to her house. However, Duvall hinted that it was people, not earthquakes, that wore her out. The exact reasons remain unclear, though she mentioned deciding to return to Texas while filming The Underneath in the state. During that shoot, she was in financial trouble. It's not just owning something that makes money, she explained. You have to also control it. You have to make sure it's a good deal. She thought she would finish the film and then head to Houston for help from her mother, who suggested she try painting. My mother said, you do so many things. Why don't you do some art? And I kept thinking, yeah, Joni Mitchell gets $40,000 a painting. I might as well try. Although she never pursued painting, Duvall stayed in Texas and vanished from the public eye for the next 2 decades. She was aging, of course, but her metamorphosis from the doe-like Duvall from Popeye and Brewster McCloud was dramatic. Once again, an obsession over her appearance surfaced, as reporters tried to track her down. But few pictures ever surfaced, and little news of her existed beyond rumors and speculation. This changed in 2016 when a producer from Dr. Phil contacted her. The encounter left a terrible impression on Duvall and caused a public uproar against the show. The interview with Phil McGraw was truly disturbing. Duvall rambled incoherently and shared paranoid fantasies. She claimed her Popeye co-star Robin Williams, who had died by suicide in 2014, was still alive and a shapeshifter. The episode, titled A Hollywood Star's Descent into Mental Illness, Saving the Shining Shelley Duvall, was met with widespread condemnation for being exploitative. During the interview, Duvall stated, "I'm very sick. I need help." She did indeed have multiple health problems, including diabetes and mental health issues. Her lifelong love of Parliament cigarettes had also taken its toll. Without clear explanations, rumors circulated that her fragile state was due to her experience filming The Shining. Duvall insisted Kubrick did not mistreat her despite the toll it took on her. "I wouldn't trade the experience for anything. Why? Because of Stanley, and it was a fascinating learning experience," she said in 2001. "It was such intense work that I think it makes you smarter, but I wouldn't want to go through it again." Regarding her appearance on Dr. Phil, Duvall reflected, "I found out the kind of person he is the hard way. My mother didn't like him either. A lot of people, like Dan, said, 'You shouldn't have done that, Shelley.'" After the broadcast and the resulting backlash, McGraw repeatedly tried to contact her to extract further scandal and expose her to more ridicule. He started calling my mother. She told him, "Don't call my daughter anymore." But he kept calling my mother all the time, trying to get her to let me talk to him again. The portrayal of Duvall and Dr. Phil was harsh and did not accurately reflect her reality. In Blanco, her local community cared for her like a cherished elder or a beloved quirky aunt, rather than a forgotten movie star. She was far from a Norma Desmond figure. Certainly, Duvall sometimes experienced anxiety attacks or talked about alien surveillance programs. However, in her final interview, she could also engage in long, coherent conversations and recalled detailed memories about her life and career. In 2018, Ryan Obermeyer, an artist from nearby Austin who had grown up watching fairy tale theater, visited Duvall out of concern for her welfare. "I brought a postcard of one of my paintings with my phone number on it and left it with Dan," said Obermeyer. "She called me 10 minutes later saying she'd love a visit." This led to regular lunches and an unlikely friendship. Duvall had collected various memorabilia from her career. Unfortunately, most of it had gone missing, likely due to unpaid storage fees, leading to an auction. Obermeyer found some of her personal letters on eBay and brought them back for her. Obermeyer also made efforts to reconnect Duvall with old friends. For instance, in 2019, he arranged a surprise FaceTime call with Paul Rubens, who had played Pinocchio on Fairy Tale Theater for her 70th birthday. To celebrate this milestone, he also organized a party at her favorite restaurant, Red Lobster, inviting a small group of her most dedicated fans. Thanks to Obermeyer and director Lee Unkrich, who also tracked her down in 2018, Dr. Phil's disgraceful attempt at a sideshow, or even mental illness freak show, is not the final word on Duvall's life. We have a much clearer picture of someone who had a full life, even if it was sometimes made more difficult by mental illness and the hardships of age. Shelley Duvall was an icon in the 1970s, and an incredibly familiar face to an entire generation of millennials, due to the near omnipresence of the Popeye VHS tape in family homes through the 1980s and early 1990s. 4 of her films have been inducted into the United States National Film Registry, recognized for their culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant contributions. Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian described Duvall as intensely modern, the very face of the new American cinema, but was also in her slender grace and wide-eyed charm, and her way with the cigarette, a neo-flapper, a kind of 20s or 30s woman reborn long after the Second World War, which also made her an excellent casting choice in period movies. She did not age according to Hollywood standards, and by the end she was indeed almost unrecognizable. But having turned her back on Hollywood 3 decades prior, why should she have conformed to such standards? She passed away on July 11, 2024, at her home in Blanco due to complications from diabetes. She will be sadly missed by her many fans across the world. From the woman who became a sensation for uttering the words, "Hello, I'm Shelley Duvall. This is a goodbye to Shelley Duvall." That's all from this episode of Hollywood Mysteries. If you'd like more from us, why not check out our YouTube membership or join us on Patreon, where our weekly series of essays, Hollywood Histories, is looking at all kinds of fascinating content, such as the roots of Mexican Gothic horror movies and the story behind the infamous Sunset Boulevard car, as driven by Norma Desmond. You can also check out our store for exciting t-shirts and other merchandise. Links are all in the description. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, sweet dreams.